Right. Looks like OBS is able to connect to YouTube a little faster than what I'm used to, which is great. So here we are, stream number 15. Let's go ahead and check out the poll results, see what folks want to work on, or want me to work on. All right. So 2 votes here. But I gotta tell you, I think I might have messed up something on like the back end of my poll here because I only received a single vote and it was for cleaning up the file. I was trying to be a little bit fancy and I might have accidentally pulled in an old vote for these table row components from a prior stream. Either way, if you take this at face value, it needs a tiebreaker, and I'm definitely inclined to continue cleaning up the file. Like I said in the last one, I did a lot of talking, and not a lot of cleaning. I see we've got Jared in the file. Good to see you. Yeah, where did we leave off? I made a bunch of pages that are empty and named them after collections of components. I also made this about page. We talked a little bit about annotation components. But yeah, I think where I want to start with this is just getting all these components rehomed onto the pages where they belong. And we can kind of start left to right here. So frame 11 looks like it might have been a throwaway of sorts. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I don't recognize it, nor do I recognize frame 14. That was probably just to demo something. All right. We've got a universal placeholder here. And I'm realizing I went against my own advice in my blog post on placeholders, where in that blog post I mentioned, you might want to have a placeholder for every single component. The reason being, there might be auto layout rules that you set on your placeholder that impact the content that gets swapped in. And so that just helps not have a bunch of dependencies. I don't know, maybe that's kind of a soft rule. It's something I need to experiment with a little bit more. But yeah, placeholders would probably be some sort of like utility component. And there might be others like that. There's, in another blog post, one of my recent ones, like editing, and I'm just cutting and pasting here. Oh, and once again, I have forgotten to get those keystrokes visible. I'm a big fan of shortcuts, and although it might be kind of fast, I want folks to be able to see when I am copy and pasting stuff. Enable. There we go. Okay. But yeah, I'm cutting and pasting to move components. And what was I saying? In one of my recent blog posts, we've got a button here. Got a buttons page on editing the width of nested instances. I talked about using the 0 frame technique to kind of create minimum widths. And we actually did that in a past stream. I don't have the number committed to memory. I want to say something like 7. I think I'm wrong though, but we've got a 0 frame in here. And again, I promise I'm not procrastinating. I just want to show you guys what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this past stuff. So I've got this little min width thing here because this container needs to hug, and I needed a certain gap between these 2 items, but everything needed to be hugging, so that way in a circumstance where I've got $1 billion to assign, I need this to be able to stretch, but I need also when the contents of container they don't need 140 pixels, I still need it to be 140 pixels. So I want that hugging capability for really long strings of text here, but yeah, I also need a minimum width. So those are really handy. And why am I talking about this again? Through talking about, minimum width 0 frames, I wanted to answer the question, like, should you componentize those? Like, is it worth turning that little minimum width into a 0 frame? And you could, especially if you're interested in creating a sort of like standard set of minimum widths for a property. So that way folks don't have to, punch in numbers. they can just sort of select from a menu. I don't know how realistic that is. Minimum widths are probably very, oh, not utility components, you know, very specific to the component that they're dealing with. So I don't know, I kind of landed, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I landed like 50-50 on it. Okay, account rows. Like, you could componentize those guys. You could leave them be. It's really all about how you like to work and what you need. Some more buttons here. I'm doing one by one. I realize I could probably bulk select some of these, but for some reason that kind of freaks me out. I just want to make sure everything comes over and we don't lose stuff. And I'm going to do the classic, just stack everything side to side. So you can see, you know, we have a page called button. I'm a big fan of, you know, when it's plural, make it plural. If there are multiple buttons, throw an S on there. Even if you could think of this as the same component, just with like some different modifications and whatnot, we still have more than one button component. It's plural. It should be buttons. Focus rings. Oh, that was such a fun one. I'm just so still thrilled about this new method. Shout out to Molly Helmuth again for being the person who I learned this from. She tweeted about, you know, using absolute positioning for focus rings, and it just blew my mind. I expect she will definitely be demoing that at Config this year. The agenda was just released yesterday, which was really exciting to see exactly who all's presenting and a little teaser about what they're presenting. And I saw her in the lineup for a session called Figma Like the Pros, along with some other, you know, kind of big names in the community. And I'm kind of expecting that she might demo that focus ring one. I hope so. I see a lot of utility in it. I want everybody to know about that. All right, sidebar stuff. So this is like a really big chunk of interface. This is this whole, I'm just going to expand it here. This whole like left side of YNAB. And we've got this sort of supportive subcomponent. And that's, I think, what this is. You know, originally when I made this, I don't know if I was familiar with Nathan Curtis's talk and article on subcomponents. So I just treated this as an interface representative, which is kind of my word for a component, like that very basic standard component that we're always, not always, but mostly building, right? We're making components that represent pieces of interface, but then we also have other components that don't necessarily represent pieces of interface, like these placeholders, focus rings. I guess you could consider them a type of component, but they're kind of almost a subcomponent in a way, right? It's about a state. So I might want to, yeah, think about renaming this. But yeah, this is, I'm pausing here because this is kind of an interesting one. I'm thinking about some of the component library work that I'm doing at my day job right now, and we don't have a lot of these big organisms. The library that we're working on is very much focused on the smallest pieces, so it's kind of throwing me a bit, these things, but let's just, we'll put them in their place, and we can always reorganize later if maybe if it turns out that there's a better way to organize these big guys. So we've got our sidebar. Oh, and this is great. Comments are coming along for the ride. The referral CTA, that is also a subcomponent of sidebar. You can see it in the, this is a, I'm going to kind of stack the subcomponents vertically, and then for things that are unique, we'll go horizontal there. But this is that little referral link, just it's got a hover state, so it had to be a component. All right. How are we looking? We've got some stuff over here. Oh, these were so fun. The month paginators. Yeah, so this part, this chunk, after we kind of graduated up out of this left sidebar, working on this big header space was the next phase of work. And this thing was really interesting. It's got this flyout. You can paginate through it. These month tiles were really interesting because, you know, they need a lot of states. You've got the month that you're on, future months that are inaccessible get disabled. You got to be able to go back. And then there was this today button, right? Because now we're back in the past. We got to jump to today. Anyway, those were a good time. I'm going to be brave and select this whole group and cut and paste that. And we have got month picker, but I think this is part of the header, even though we've got our month paginators here. So this whole, if you inspect the class for this big chunk at the top, one of those like parent level containers, this whole thing is called header. And this specifically is the date picker. And it looks like these kind of get reused. They can get reused in both places. Not only are they part of this header, so we can jump between months, but they're also inside, right? They kind of show up in both places. So this is where I'm not fully comfortable with one component per page organizing, because it never ends up being that. And you run into these circumstances where the same component might live or might contribute to many other components. And maybe that just means it needs its own page, but I don't know. I find it tricky, and I'm never fully satisfied with where components land in the page setup. So maybe we can try and solve for that this time, though. So the month tiles, those will definitely be part of the month picker. We're going to come up with another one of those examples too, like this whole thing. Maybe not though. And I'm surprised I didn't do this. Oh my gosh, I might need to refactor this. So what I had in mind was this modal component. It's actually really good that I'm cleaning up the file. This is good to like look back and just take stock of what we have and see like, oh, I hadn't yet built the modal when I was building date picker, probably. But what I'm thinking now is that you can see I've got this placeholder in here. All of these contents, like, you know, this chunk and this chunk, that could easily become a component and get swapped in here. Obviously, we're going to need to reduce the top padding from 16 to something like, what's going on here? We've got 2 on top, 10 on the bottom, but that's cool. I could override that. And the reason why I want that is because, let's see, I mean, like, what do we have for rounded corners? 6.4, kind of a weird number. 8 over here. They should just be standardized. This one has like a big old shadow on it. This one doesn't. So they are different, but do they need to be? Like, in their shape, they're very similar. Anyway, month picker will definitely go on the month picker page. And modal, which again, it's like month picker uses modal, but modal gets its own page. I wonder if that's another annotation component that could be worth building. I've never had the chance or the bandwidth to like build one at work, but I've always sort of imagined kind of like a visual dependency map for components using instances to like just show like, you know, all of your tiniest atomic or atom sized pieces at the top, and then you get down to your molecules or whatever, like, not officially naming them, I think, like within that framework, but just to speak to it, and then showing like, yeah, this is consuming this other thing. It would be a lot of maintenance to keep up with that, I think, but it must like calm down after a while, you know. I think if you're in the beginnings of making a library, that would be very daunting, and maybe the return on your investment might not be worth it in the beginning, but still could be cool to have. Horizontal rule. Gotta have its own page. Now, at some point, I would alphabetize these pages. Maybe we can do that at the end. Got 15 minutes still. Got our budget header totals. Those are part of the, oh my gosh, it's right there, the header, right? That's a subcomponent. It's this guy. Zoom out a little bit. Where are we? This ready to assign breakdown modal content, yes, is part of the, oh, just keep losing it, header. This shows up inside of a modal when you click on this is like a big button, essentially, just to remind folks if you're new to YNAB. So when you hover over, what is the trigger for this? Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, this is probably, you know, I love YNAB, so I say this with love, but this needing to hover over where that icon is to reveal the icon is not a great pattern, in my opinion, and I think the opinions of many others. I would expect maybe this entire button, like this entire green space, to be the trigger for that icon, but that's all right. When you click on it, when you do discover the hidden little info icon, you can click on it and you get this breakdown of what you earned in the prior month. Let me zoom in here. What you earned in the prior month, how much of it you didn't spend that month and is rolling over to this month, and combine that with any money you've earned in the current month, you get the total that you're ready to assign. And this is kind of YNAB's whole, like, this is like kind of a core principle of this budgeting app. So yeah, a lot of information in here. This took a long time to like get the spacing right. Bunch of text, bunch of stuff. And that's where these horizontal rules are showing up. So, and I think I put that in headers, right? Because that's the only place you can access that from. So this would be something that, you know, eventually I would want to hook up some prototypes to make that available. Did I? I'm just checking now. Did I include that secret little info icon? I must have. Here it is. We did not have component properties when this was built. That is exciting. Now, how did I do this? I hid the vector. Okay, interesting. I'll come back to that. When I go back and add in the timestamps for this stream, I think I'm gonna have a good chunk of to-dos, which is great because that's good material for y'all to vote on. See what I can do for future streams. All right, sidebar empty state. We've got, okay, and I mean easy, that's another sidebar. Oh, okay, and yeah, that's interesting that I made it a whole component. Like you might be looking and being like, why did you, why not just include this chunk as part of this guy? But to me, and I hope I'm echoing my past self and being consistent, but at least looking at it today, this does make sense as a separate component. I'm duplicating a bunch of stuff, right? Like if ever, this is more maintenance work, but I'm okay with that. For example, this container here called tabs, right? If the spacing ever increased from 4 to 12, now I have to do that in 2 different places, especially if I'm not making this part itself a component. Maybe I should. But yeah, it's like, why would you kind of duplicate a whole thing just for an empty state? And the reason is because, like, I mean, if you think about using this component library, I would not expect this to get used like hardly ever. It could be a very useful piece in some sort of onboarding prototype if the design team or the UX research team was interested in, you know, just doing some testing on the onboarding experience. They might need a component like this, but for all other delivery work, for like enhancements to the product, this one where you have accounts where the user has been onboarded and is, you know, they've got some history with the application, I would expect this one to have more use. So yeah, just keeping them separate to think, and how do I want to say that? they're separate because I'm thinking about how they would actually get used in real life by a design, by a UX team. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. I'm kind of into this. Yeah, empty states are kind of like, you need them, but it's like, how much are they actually getting used in prototypes? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a team out there that's like testing with empty states all the time, and they would want just a single component with one little property in the asset panel. And now that we are able to bubble up nested instances and you can swap components as a property, I would totally consider that as something like, like contents and like populated versus not populated, right? I'd want it to be a Boolean toggle, but if it's swapping components, it would have to be that little drop down, and that would be the more like layer efficient way to do it. But anyway, that's a possible refactor we could do. So we've got these category view toggle buttons. This is a whole nother chunk. This is kind of the last building part that we left off on. Oh, Jared, I'm sorry. I missed your comment from 6 minutes ago. Do you ever use a naming scheme for subcomponents, or you tend to keep them organized by page? They'll at least be sectioned in the assets panel that way. I think I would keep, let me make sure I'm actually answering your question correctly. I would tend to keep the subcomponents with their parent, like whoever they're supporting. And I do think I would keep, now that we have sections here, I would keep them in their sections. So that way, and actually here's the other thing too. You mentioned the assets panel. I have purposefully been putting dots. I might switch to underscores because it's a little bit more visual. But purposefully keeping them as unpublished components, because by themselves, I mean, they might be useful. Perhaps a designer could use these smaller bits in something they're working on, but they are optimized to support their parent component. And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to get to them, right? So in this set, like these are, let me just like drag these off so we're not distracted by the other bits. In this set, or collection of things, we've got the cell, which does get published, right? And then we have all of its subcomponents. And there's some other stuff in here too, right? This is all actually contributing to like table rows eventually. But if somebody needed this particular button, right, like that, you would think based on its name, it would go with the buttons. I would keep it with the cell because that's where it shows up. And if somebody needed it, they could pull an instance of cell into their file. They could click down. We've got a wrapper here. They can still grab an instance of it. It doesn't mean it's completely unusable in local files. It just takes a little bit of work and digging to get to, which maybe isn't great. I don't know. I think that's something where it's like really dependent on the team to know like what pieces they need fast access to and which ones like they're like, no, that's, it's optimized for that component. We don't want it to be used in a way that used for other stuff, like by mistake. But that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. Oh, got another button over here. Lots of different buttons in YNAB. Something else that's cool about this method of like collecting all your stuff on one page is you're kind of like doing that audit work that often gets done when component libraries are stood up for the first time. When you do those sort of like interface cut up exercises, teams will just take screenshots of like all the major pages within their product and then just start slicing like, okay, this is how many buttons we have, and like, unique buttons too. And you can really see if you're starting to get like, if you're kind of working your way into some design debt, like, hey, do these really need to be different? Kind of like what I was talking about with the modal and then that date picker. Like they're pretty close. Could we just consolidate them? Do we have a good reason for them to be as different as they are? Which is you know, minor. All right, so let's move cell. Oh, okay, past me from the last stream. Let me just get this off of my clipboard. Cells and table rows. I'm doubting my past self for having these be separate things. Cells make up table rows. You could think of them almost as subcomponents. And in YNAB, you know, maybe there's a product out there where you do want like really fast access to cells. Like, just give me those, I'm going to make my own table row. But in YNAB, table rows only show up in a couple different places. And we've been focusing on this budget panel. There is still so much to do, y'all. When we get into account screens, like, I think these are the same pieces here. We're going to have a bunch of table rows here. So like right now we're looking at a fictitious checking account, and as transactions happen, they kind of flow in here, and then you assign them to your categories. So these are obviously a little bit expanded, but yeah, if you collapse them down, they look about the same. So table rows do show up in multiple places, but they're very specific. Like, there's no way for me as a user to add columns. Like, it's very opinionated, these tables. I can't even rearrange these columns. Because of that, I'm thinking that it doesn't make a ton of sense. Maybe cells don't need to be published. Maybe maybe those are subcomponents of tables. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna change my mind. Cells are just gonna go with table rows, and we will delete the page called cells. And then this, even though I was just telling you, Jared, that this gets published, I think I might be wrong. We'll try it. All right, let's see if hopefully cut and paste works with sections. Good. So now we've got subcomponents contributing to other subcomponents that do contribute to something that would get published. And we don't have the table rows yet. We've got some frames that are kind of shaping up to be table rows, but they haven't been turned into components yet. So that's definitely something for the to-do list. I think that was my option for this stream too, right? Like turning these into components. We've got 3 minutes to go, 3 minutes till 8, and we are so close. We've got most of it here. So these category view toggles, those are a very specific part of the budget interface, these little fellas. So we will move those to, and they're part of, I would consider them part of the table rows. And these are supportive kind of subcomponents. They will also need a dot in front of them. Do that later. Or actually, no, this is a good time to demo. Really great renaming trick. So when you have more than one thing selected, more than one layer selected on the canvas, and you do Command R, you get this interface. If you want to rename something, like I can see that these both have the word view in them. If I wanted to isolate that and rename it to something like something else, I could do that, and it would happen for both of those instances of view. Something else I didn't realize is, you know, like, okay, I want to put a period in front of their names, but they don't share the same name. Well, I can just do period and then current name. I don't know what this, like, I don't know if I want to call it like a language, but like, or this syntax, but I was blind to these buttons for so long. And this current name one I use a lot. So this is really good for bulk editing, like prefixing stuff. You know, maybe I wanted to put these in some sort of folder with their current name, right? It just makes prefixing and appending stuff, and then, or deleting those prefix and appended strings really easy. So highly recommend. Okay. Even if I go a little over, I think we're just so close. I'm gonna get rid of these screenshots. If I need fresh ones, I will grab them. This is a checkbox. Ooh, okay. I didn't make anything for that. Now, for now, I'm going to put checkbox on its own page, and I would do the same with radios, the same with text inputs and selects. I would not do a whole thing called form elements because there's just too many. And it's, even though they might be related, I don't know. That's my hunch right now. All right, we've got all these icons. I have iconography here. I know I'm missing some stuff still. Okay, the logo. Now, I would actually put the logo in a separate library. And I'm going to just kind of do a blanket like brand assets. If there were illustrations, if there were like, I don't know, textures or patterns. And when I say patterns, I mean like animal print. We wouldn't see that, but like you'd see on fabric, right? Not pattern in like the user experience sense. But yeah, YNAB doesn't have a lot of that. I think it's really just the logo. There might be some other things. I don't know if we're going to go so far as to doing this little help thing. It could be useful. Again, like I could see there being prototypes that involve like, you know, we want to test how easy it is for folks to get in touch with the support team. Why not? Even if this is some sort of external service that they're using, something like Intercom or Drift Chat. I don't know. I'm not very familiar with those products. But yeah, I've seen little promotional things, or when YNAB has a really big feature release, sometimes, you know, they want that to be cute. And so there might be illustrations that make their way in, but still, I would keep those separate. They are not interface. They are probably items that the brand or maybe it's the marketing team that would be responsible for those. And I would want, my hunch is that it's easier if they get to have a separate space to manage those assets. They might have a different workflow than the product team that is maintaining this library, right? There might be a very specific process for making contributions to a UI library than there would be, like it would be very different potentially for brand assets, right? And different organizing schemas too. Like they might have a completely different opinion about how pages get used, how components get named. So I think giving those kinds of tools, separate spaces, could be helpful. That's my hunch. Okay, we've moved the components. They're on their own pages. Still need to alphabetize those pages. As I mentioned, just doing this exercise, there were a ton of things that kind of came up along the way that I could, like, there's components that need to be revisited and enhanced with new component property features that haven't been yet. And some ideas for some future stuff too. So newsletter subscribers, y'all get to decide. That email will go out a week from today, so you have time to catch up on this. Yeah, I think that's it. The next stream will be 2 weeks from today. So